Law. Chapter 1. The Strange Man. Once upon a time, in a small village by the river, there was a wealthy man named Mr. Henry. He was not only known for his wealth, but also for his kindness, always willing to help anyone in need. However, the most peculiar thing about him was his unusual rule for lending money. Anyone who borrows money from me must promise to repay it, either in this life or in the next. It sounded strange, but it was his unbreakable rule. Honest people always chose to repay in this life, but dishonest ones laughed and chose to pay in the next life, thinking they had tricked him. However, no one knew that the small notebook Mr. Henry always carried was not an ordinary ledger. He meticulously recorded the names of those who promised to repay in the next life, and somehow he had a mysterious way of ensuring they truly fulfilled their promise. Chapter 2. The Cunning Swindler. In the village, there was a cunning man named Jack. He was a swindler who never did honest work, always seeking to make money through deceitful schemes. When he heard about Mr. Henry and his strange lending rule, Jack came up with a perfect plan. He thought, "What a foolish old man. If I borrow a large sum and choose to repay it in the next life, I'll never have to return it. He can't do anything to me." So Jack went to meet Mr. Henry. He wore ragged clothes, pretended to be miserable, and lamented his dire situation. "Sir Henry, I'm struggling. My family has nothing to eat, and my children are starving. Please lend me some money, and I promise to repay you." Mr. Henry looked at him for a moment and asked, "Do you wish to repay in this life or the next?" Jack pretended to think, then chuckled to himself. "I will repay in the next life." Mr. Henry said nothing more, simply noted it down in his ledger and handed Jack the money. Jack took the money, feeling triumphant, thinking he had easily outwitted the old man. But in truth, he had another plan, not only to take the money, but also to steal all of Mr. Henry's wealth. Chapter 3. The Fateful Night. That night, Jack returned to Mr. Henry's house, intending to rob him. He hid in the shadows, observing every corner. That morning, he had noticed a large steel safe in the corner of the room, where Mr. Henry stored his treasures. Jack climbed over the fence and sneaked into the backyard. But as he approached the window, he realized the lights inside were still on. Mr. Henry had not yet gone to bed. "Damn it! Is he still awake?" Jack thought. Unable to act immediately, he decided to hide in the stable at the back to wait. As he waited, Jack suddenly heard strange whispers. He froze and looked around but saw no one. Then he realized something terrifying. It was the voices of the horses in the stable. "Are you new here?" an old horse asked. "Yes," the younger horse replied. "I was just brought here this morning." Jack was paralyzed. He couldn't believe his ears. How could he understand the horse's speech? But what he heard next was even more horrifying. The old horse sighed. "In my previous life, I was a fraudster. I once borrowed money from Mr. Henry and said I would repay it in the next life. I thought I was clever, but when I died, I was reborn as a horse in his very own stable. Now, I must work tirelessly to repay my debt." Jack felt his blood run cold. He looked at the horse before him and realized its eyes looked just like those of a human. The young horse trembled and said, "Me too. I was once a wealthy merchant, but because of my dishonesty, I was reincarnated as a horse. Now, I must pull carts, carry goods, and endure hardship to repay my debt." Jack's head spun. He looked down at his hands, terrified that one day, he too might turn into an animal to repay the debt he had just taken. At dawn, as soon as the sun rose, Jack rushed to Mr. Henry's house, gasping for breath. I want to return the money I borrowed," he shouted. Mr. Henry calmly looked at Jack as if he had expected this to happen. He opened his ledger, turned to the page with Jack's name, and smiled. "Are you sure? Because according to your promise, this debt will be repaid in the next life." Jack fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Please erase my name from the ledger. I don't want to be reborn as an animal to repay my debt." Mr. Henry nodded and crossed out Jack's name. "Remember, karma never spares anyone. Whatever we do in this life, whether good or bad, will always return to us." Jack shuddered. From that day on, he changed completely. He abandoned his deceitful ways, lived honestly, and helped others. And most importantly, he never dared to borrow money without repaying it again. Lesson learned. This story reminds us that no one can escape karma. Whatever we do, whether good or bad, will always come back to us in one way or another. If we live honestly and righteously, we will receive blessings. But if we deceive and cheat, we will have to pay the price. Perhaps not in this life, but certainly in the next.